And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Business Focus Live with me, John, where we talk about business related topics as well as news from here and around the world. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and let's get started. And we're back. Thank you again for joining me today. So, today is September the 2nd, 2022. So, it's the Burr months already. So, Christmas is around the corner. Uh, anyway, going on with today's discussion. So, a lot of things interesting going on in the past week or so, none more so than the first topic that we're going to discuss, which is HBO, the company, which we have been discussing heavily since last week regarding their shift in focus as it with regards to their merger with Discovery Channel recently. Now, not only they're trying to consolidate their content, but focusing on popular IPs that they can showcase with the likes of the prequel of the Game of Thrones. And I was surprised when they announced that they're going to showcase another TV show based from a TV game, popular game, The Last of Us. And I had my apprehension because, as with any other shows and in other networks, they've tried to do that with the likes of Halo, which didn't fare well, and you have popular IPs like Star Trek, which has been in disarray with the latest iterations of the series here. But anyway, seems to look promising with regards to the Last of Us TV show, meaning the first part of the Last of Us TV show. No, the game of the Last of Us, the first part, not the second one, which was very controversial. And I was surprised or interested to know who was going to be the main protagonist here, who's going to play the character Joel, and who's going to play the character. What's the name of the character? I forgot. Let's look at the article here. Obviously, if it's done right, can be a big boon for the network here. And as you can see here, the main titular character will be played by none other than the Mandalorian himself. Uh, the name of the actor, I forgot. The name is, can't forget it. I forgot his name. Pedro Pascal. Yeah, that's a go. That's the thing I was trying to remember here. And with the looks of it, choosing the character or the actor Pedro Pascal was, I think it's a good choice. The question is, how are they going to portray Joel here? Obviously, Joel doesn't look like anywhere close to the actor Mr. Pascal here. But obviously, in terms of the acting ability of Mr. Pascal is, very compelling in terms of the many films he's played, and even he played played tremendously in playing the character of the Mandalorian himself. So hopefully, the network can do justice by hiring the right directors, screenwriters, and create a tremendous show. And obviously, if you play the game, the game is a very complicated, but at the end of the day, it's all about heart and about drama in terms of making tough choices. If they're going to actually replicate the game's version story itself, I think it would be fine. It's very popular. It's been remastered from the original PlayStation, early PlayStation days, all the way to the PS4 to the PS5. So it would be interesting if they're going to follow suit. Maybe follow some of the main themes in terms of the dilemma that they encountered, but how they expand the story would be interesting. But focusing on the main two titular characters here would be interesting nonetheless here. So, as mentioned earlier, it's not just The Last of Us they're betting that's going to be a big hit, but the prequel to the Game of Thrones, which was a big mishap in the last season. So now they're having the prequel, which is The House of the Dragon. So I haven't seen the trailers of that yet. Now, it was mentioned that according to the HBO Chief Content Officer, Casey Bloys, mentioned that we can expect to see the show around 2023, but didn't offer any narrower of a window than that. So meaning they're going to show that. So that's about a year from now before they can release the actual TV show. Hopefully they do justice to it, because based on the game, it's already a very compelling case. They just have to replicate it, or if you want to deviate from that main story and try to differentiate from itself, obviously you want to don't deviate too much, because if you don't want if you do that, you tend to piss off the main viewers who have followed the game itself. And if you're going to change the core of the story, then make sure it's a compelling one. If it's a totally different story, which is you're allowed to do, but make sure it's a tremendous one, not like how Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, or the Rings of Power in Amazon has been a terrible production in itself in terms of its content and story arc, which is another discussion altogether here. And one can always be hopeful in terms of providing ample entertainment, not just whatever agendas, hidden agendas they want to portray in their TV shows. So otherwise, no one's going to watch it, right? Which is kind of sad and disappointing. But here's to hoping here. So I'll keep you updated with the progress of the show here. Anyway, next is we'll be talking about how Alibaba is who's been in the limelight for so long with Mr. Jack Ma's big company growing and growing to where they are today. But what's interesting is they're not just focusing on the e-commerce platform, but focusing on selling you an actual product here. In this case, an electric vehicle, which is I find it interesting when I saw the article here. So according to techtimes.com, so the company is producing its first ever EV or electric vehicle later this year, and the car looks like a Hot Wheels of sorts, because it's very small, very compact, very inexpensive. And I don't know if that would take off, because obviously it depends on the use case of this one. So let's take a closer look. So what they're offering is a unique EV experience. It's an electric car, as mentioned, that will excite you, as it looks like a life-size Hot Wheels toys here. So if you know anything about Hot Wheels, so they're very flamboyant and exciting here. So let's see here what not this video. It's this one. So it's really small. Does it look like Bumblebee from Transformers? Maybe not, but you can see here it can only accommodate, one individual in the vehicle here. And obviously it won't be ideal if you're traveling far-flung places. And I think in terms of its horsepower, it only has 6 horsepower, so it will not travel fast if you have a highway you need to traverse too. I'm assuming that the goal of this vehicle is for you to be able to travel from where you live somewhere close to where you want to be in terms of school or maybe work here. And I think the price here is around, I think it was mentioned, around $5,000, so roughly around 350,000 pesos in Philippine currency. And obviously that's going to be expensive, but considering if you're buying a new car, that's still pretty cheap. And if you're familiar in buying cars, which cost in the north of millions of pesos, then buying a brand new but very small petite vehicle may be to your liking here. And I think they're trying to target trying to target students to use this vehicle here. And obviously in terms of ability for people or students, kids, to be able to own their own car would be enticing to many. But obviously that would cost a lot more vehicles in the vehicle and cause more traffic. But that's for another discussion here as well. Anyway, so it mentions here that it can run up to 50 kilometers per hour or 31 miles per hour here. And it will not be considered a very speedy vehicle, but nonetheless, it can get you to where you want to be in terms of from point A to point B here. But will it attract a lot of its customers here or people to buy their vehicle? Now, take note, Alibaba hasn't been known in the past in terms of being a car manufacturer. So it's important for us to understand who the manufacturing partner that they're partnering with, because obviously in terms of the selling part, the platform, they can sell it in their platform, but who's going to make it, who's going to build it, and who's going to maintain it if, let's say, car breaks down and they need to get it fixed here. So that's one of the many questions that needs to be answered here. So stay tuned for that one as well as we move forward here. Now, sticking with vehicles as well, for our next segue, we have car manufacturing giants who's competing with the likes of Tesla vehicles, which is Honda, is partnering with a big giant as well, LG in this case. Now, for many of you who's familiar with LG, is known for producing the OLED TVs, but the South Korean maker is also known in other types of business. In this case, producing EV batteries for different customers here, and their partner is very interesting. And I think we've discussed this already in the past, but what's interesting here is, according to CNBC.com, their partnership is going to bear fruit by building a $4 billion battery plant in the United States. So meaning they're trying to build not just the manufacturing for vehicles, but also obviously one of the main key components for running an electric vehicle is the battery source itself. And ensuring that the supply chain of your raw materials are close to one another ensures that you can produce a lot of your finished products or electric vehicles here. As mentioned here, Honda Motor and LG Solution has planned to invest a little over $4 billion in terms of building their battery plant in the United States. Now, it's mentioned here it's going to be expected to start producing or mass producing lithium ion batteries by the end of 2025. So that's still a few years away. So I'm assuming they'll start the building of the facility, and hopefully in 2 3 years time they'll be able to make it up and running already here. So what's interesting here, it mentions that it's the latest in a slew of automakers announcing plans to invest in American production of battery cells here. Now, obviously one of the main component or rationale for making or building a plant or manufacturing plant or whatever product it is so that it's much closer to your actual customers here. And obviously the electric vehicle is very highly popular in the United States and parts of Europe and in China as well. So if you're trying to build it in your own country, let's say Honda in Japan, then you have to import it or export it, and that's going to bring up or increase the cost here. But if you build it with the local what do you call this, local manufacturers or local employees in that corresponding countries, then it would make sense for lowering down the cost, and obviously good for the economy and good for the consumer, since the cost of the end product would be lower as well here. And obviously one of the main issues still plaguing many electric vehicle is the longevity of the battery, of how far you can use it, because obviously if your battery source drains out, it's not as if you could just push it to the nearest gas station and refill it quickly. It takes time, and their charging stations, similar to how Tesla is offering their Tesla superchargers, takes minutes, tens of minutes, or even less than an hour, I think. So you still have to wait there. And if you're in a hurry, there's a lot of inconvenience that has to be tackled first. Either increase the battery capacity or elongate the ability to be able to use it for longer periods. So let's say you'll travel 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, or even 500 kilometers before you have to recharge your battery. So similar to how gasoline-powered engine would look like here. But until that time comes, I think there's still a lot of apprehension, even before I truly consider EV vehicles as an alternative. Now, obviously, they're making a lot of headways in that technology-wise, but in terms of the battery capacity, still a long ways. And the fact that the other issue that I very vehement or very adamant about is regarding the software aspect, that companies tries to lock you in that you have to pay for a service fee like how Tesla does with their full self-driving features, which is supposed to be embedded in the price tag when you purchase the vehicle. But that's a different discussion altogether here. So meaning, in the United States, where are they planning to build it? So I don't know, they haven't mentioned where they're planning it, but this is also a plus for Americans in the United States, wherever they're planning to build the plant. So it gives them an increase in employment and obviously stability for those people working in the plant that's going to produce, a boatload of batteries, and eventually even Honda manufacturing a boatload of vehicles as well in the future. So who else are going to partner? Obviously, in the case of what do you call this, of Tesla, they make their own batteries, and obviously they have still a plethora of issues with regards to their electric vehicle. But in terms of Tesla strategizing making their own products so that they can solidify their manufacturing, which is makes more easier and more they can produce it much faster than other competitors as well. Anyway, our next topic is in terms of aviation. So, interestingly enough, if you're familiar, one of the richest person in Asia here, in particular, Mr. Tony Fernandez, which owns the carrier AirAsia. Now, obviously, with the pandemic, you have to halt majority of your fleet or the entire fleet due to the pandemic, the lockdown. But obviously, with the resumption of our normal life, so to speak, Mr. Fernandez is betting that the recovery will expedite the growth of the aviation industry, in particular travel in general as a whole here. So let's take a closer look. So according to Forbes.com, Mr. Tycoon, Mr. Tycoon, Tycoon Tony Fernandez is expanding its fleet, which is one would think that you try to slowly progress your business, try to recover as much as you can. But in his case, he's trying to even grow his fleet. Obviously, expanding your fleet is not an easy matter, but if you have the capital resources to do that, then so be it. Now, obviously, Air Asia is a what would you consider a budget friendly airline, so that it targets as mentioned Air Asia around Asia countries for travel destination, whether it's India, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan, Japan, whatever Asian country. So obviously making short trips can, just like with any transportation, you can do more trips compared to long hauls, which you have to charge because you only have one direct flight from one destinations to another. So obviously capitalizing it and knowing that the recovery of the economies, not just in Asia but around the world, that people will start traveling again, visiting different places again, like what they used to do before the pandemic. And I think that's what Mr. Fernandez is leveraging and betting. So rather than wait for the customers to come in, he's already investing in the fleets of airlines that he's going to purchase or has already purchased, I think, so that when the rise of travelers kicks in, which is inevitable, it's always the cycle, then he can capitalize on it. He has already a fleet of airplanes to accommodate them. But obviously, the main concern here is, do you have the pilots to handle those the airplanes? Because like in what happened in the United States and in Europe, where they have to lay off a bunch of their workforce because of cost cutting measures. And that, as I mentioned in the past, in the past year or so, that's never a long-term solution. They should have tried to find other means, because letting go of your best pilots in this case, or best employees, then you have to hire new one, which what they're trying to do now. You need to build up their experience, so it's going to cost you even more because of the training, and hopefully there's no accident that's happened along the way. And if you were to just retain your best pilots in the first place, then you won't be in this problem eventually. And obviously those are decisions, tough decisions, that every CEO or president in a company has to make decisions with. Now, going to going back here, so according to the article, it mentions here, according to Mr. Fernandez, the CEO of AirAsia, as mentioned, we'll be taking deliveries of the new Airbus A321 Neos from 2024, which will further reduce our emissions per seat by 20% while further driving our business growth. Now, obviously, carbon emission is always good to reduce it tremendously, but obviously with Airbus or Boeing producing better, more efficient, and less costly airplanes would be a big investment, and obviously a lot of airline companies are trying to capitalize on that, so that, let's say, in the case of an existing airplane, it can accommodate only, let's say, 100 people, and obviously you can only fill that seat with 100 people, but the fuel is the main cost that they need to address, in terms of every time you refuel, the cost of fuel keeps on rising here, and that's a big concern for any business. So rather than worry about the cost of fuel, why not make sure that the use of the fuel is more efficient than it used to be, meaning in terms of taking less fuel or having a longer range to be able to travel further would be ideal. And I think that's what they're trying to capitalize, or the CEO, Mr. Fernandez, is trying to capitalize with the latest technology of the Airbus here. It mentions here that the group's revenue increased to 2 billion ringgit, or a little over $500 million by the end of June 30. So obviously, capitalizing on this, the aviation group is looking forward to the continued ramp up of air passengers demand, which I think will eventually happen, because obviously the cycle will always follow. Before the pandemic, it was rising, then the pandemic came, it went down, then it will go up again, and obviously catching the rise of demand will always be to your benefit if you know when to position yourselves properly here. Anyway, good luck to AirAsia here. Actually, I haven't tried, their carrier here, so it's interesting. What type of service do they offer here? Anyway, for our last topic, it's a very interesting one. Uh, you might notice that in terms of technology, I've been talking about a lot of technologies nowadays, obviously because it's even more prominent in our daily lives. But in terms of our laptops, desktops, smartphones, even car technologies, we rely on chips, very powerful chips to power up our devices here. And there are only few manufacturers that supplies the entire global network, or a variety of companies here. And one of those, the number one chip maker in the world, you may not know them, is called TSMC, or Taiwan Semi Manufacturing Corporation. And one of their main customers is Apple. So you might notice Apple phones, they use the chips that is installed in their devices is manufactured by TSMC. Now, you might be interested to find out TSMC is a very small company per se, because they're based in Taiwan, a very small country in a small island in Asia here, but they hold the largest market share in the world. So if there were anything to happen in Taiwan in terms of the company's disruption of their production, can wreak havoc to the entire globe. Now, who are their main competitors here? Now, there are only a few actually. So let's take a look here. So according to techspot.com, you have Samsung. Obviously, they build their own chips, and for other companies, and then you have Intel. Then that's about it. That's the only main players that are familiar to majority of us. And the question here is, TSMC is the king of chip manufacturing, which I was surprised to find out. Not surprised in a sense, but how dominant they are in their industry. And the question here, according to the article, is there anyone that can catch up to them? So if you don't believe how big the gap is, let me show you here. So in terms of its manufacturing, so they primarily focus on producing chips, right? So if you're to look at this chart, look at the left side here. So you can see here, the blue part here, TSMC owns half of the market, a little over half of the market, 53%. And it's a Taiwan-owned company. And then you have Samsung, which only has a paltry 18% of the market share. And then there's the others. So that's how big the gap is. And if you notice here, The foundry business is generating a little over 107 million dollars. Is it dollars? 100 million? Could be wrong. But compare that to this year now. Their growth has, not significant, but it has grown steadily from 53% to now 56%. And what's interesting, Samsung's market share has decreased. And obviously, this has severe repercussions or ramifications. If you're a company, obviously, if you're trying to build any device that relies on CPU chips, so whether you're Intel, AMD, Nvidia, you have to rely on those vendors to provide your CPU or compute power here. And obviously, their dominance is good for their business, but it's not good for competition here. Not that they're not doing a tremendous job of providing the chip here. Obviously, if you're a market leader, you can command the price here. That's why they're able to charge more. That's why they sell it a high premium price. That's why like companies like Apple sell their products at high premium as well. Now, on the other hand, what's interesting is how come Samsung, which has been in the industry far longer than TSMC, I think, let me see, when was TSMC? Where the heck is it? TSMC. Let's see, when were they founded? Uh, they were already founded way back in 1987, but they weren't that dominant in their market way back in the 80s. So what happened to Samsung that they're not able to capitalize on their growth, on their what do you call this? The large scale business, which is Samsung. Now, obviously, for many of you, Samsung doesn't just only produce smartphones. They produce a lot of variety of products and services worldwide. So they're not just reliant on one business. But for TSMC, obviously, they're only primarily known for focusing their business on producing semiconductor production, which is what they've been doing ever since. And obviously, that has benefited them the most. But for Samsung, what's the problem here? Now, there were mentions in this article that obviously for as large of a company as Samsung is, obviously it creates a lot of bureaucracy or maybe different culture that makes it difficult to deal with them. So if you're a company that's interested in partnering with them, maybe it takes a longer time, maybe it's faster, more streamlined compared to TSMC, which is, I think they could learn from how TSMC has reached their growth and to where they're positioned nowadays here. And obviously, for Samsung's case, there's always room for improvement. And as long as, administration or, up in the uh, executives up there, the major decision makers can see this as an opportunity rather than as a hindrance for increasing their market share. I would have thought that they would have higher market share than what they have now, not just in the 18% that what they are showing here. And obviously that has a big effect in terms of the supply chain issues here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if something were to happen, a disruption were to happen in Taiwan, especially with the political instability that's going on between mainland China and Taiwan, and if something were to happen to disrupt their operations here, now obviously they have other plants in around the world, but their headquarters is obviously quartered in Taiwan. So any disruption in their main office could have severe implications around the world. But we're not hoping for that to happen. But if that were the case, similar to what happened in the pandemic, then you already saw what the crisis can lead to. A lot of products cannot be completed, like the chips that is installed in many car manufacturers in the United States. I think like Ford and GM, they had to sell their cars without the chip because of that shortage parts of last year. And obviously, would you buy it if it's incomplete? For me, I wouldn't buy it. And that's why reliance on technology is good in one sense, but things like this were to happen, then obviously, it's not a complete product in my estimations anyhow here. But for companies like Samsung, there's always room for improvement. Now, in terms of Intel, I used to think that Intel was one of the biggest players in the chip making. Obviously, they produce their own CPUs, but in terms of selling their products, obviously they don't do that. And as big as Intel is, TSMC is still king in terms of chip making, semiconductor chip making here for a variety of customers here. And if you what's interesting, if you're familiar with Qualcomm, the CPUs that you see in your smartphones, Samsung produces them, and Qualcomm is their main customers. That's why they produce it, and Samsung makes them. And if what's interesting, Samsung makes a lot of interesting products, not just chips. The cameras that Apple uses is based from Samsung here, so you can see how big their companies is. But obviously, it's not everything is perfect here, and obviously with building relationships with your customers here is always important. So maybe they can make some improvements so that they can increase their growth, be more competitive with the likes uh, of TSMC as well here. Obviously, more competition is always good for us customers so that prices are down. We have a variety of choices here. Anyway, I think that's about it. That covers our topic for this week. If you have any questions, you can check out the links in the description below for the full article here. Anyway, as always, continue supporting the channel. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.